Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayanti Nashtabraishu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtiki. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Srila Das Goswami, Volume 4, in every town and village around the world, 1968 to 1971, Chapter 31st, A Threat Against ISKCON. So Prabhupada is in Boston, and that's where the printing press is. So Prabhupada is down in the press location. And last line of last paragraph, so everyone who speaks English should have an ISKCON press publication. That's amazing vision. So compared to most authors, Prabhupada's literary contribution was already substantial. But he wasn't just an author. His mission was to flood the world with literature glorifying Lord Krishna. Prabhupada's ISKCON was now 3 years old. Yet his disciples were only beginning to execute his plans for printing and distributing transcendental literature. Printing was an important step, the first step. Months ago, Prabhupada had written, the press must work on continuously and we shall produce immense volumes of literature. If the press goes on nicely, I shall be able to give you material for publishing a book every 2 months. I mean, nobody can write book every 2 months. But Prabhupada was ready. And not just he was writing or translating books, he was traveling, initiating disciples, seeing the whole activities of ISKCON. We have got so much material for Krishna consciousness movement. And just prior to coming to Boston, he had written, Sankirtan and distributing back to Godhead and our other literatures is the fieldwork of this movement. Temple worship is secondary. Now ISKCON was printing 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead per month. And Prabhupada hoped to increase the sales more and more. Standing in the crowded, chilly basement, surrounded by devotees, press machines, and transcendental literature, Prabhupada described how he wanted ISKCON press to operate. He said that after dictating a tape, he would mail it to Boston to be transcribed. The transcription should take no more than 2 days. During the next 2 days, someone would edit the transcribed manuscript. Then another editor would take 2 days to edit the transcript a second time. The Sanskrit editor would add diacritical markings, and the manuscript would be ready for composing. Prabhupada said he could produce 15 tapes, 300 manuscripts pages every month. 15 tapes means 1 tape every 2 days. At that rate, ISKCON press should produce a book every 2 months, or 6 books in a year. Prabhupada wanted to print at least 60 books. Therefore, his press workers would have plenty to do for the next 10 years. If the devotees simply printed his books incessantly, he said, even if they had to work 24 hours a day in shifts, it would give him great delight. He was ready, if necessary, to drop all his activities except for publishing books. This was a special nectar the press devotees were hankering to hear. Printing books was Prabhupada's heart. It was a thing most dear to him. During Prabhupada's week in Boston, Purushottam continued as secretary and servant out of duty. His difficulties in London had increased. Doubtful and morose, he came before Prabhupada 2 days before their departure. Purushottam, I had decided to live in London. I just felt like there were different things I wanted to do. But I felt obligated to stay with him because he needed me there. It was my job to at least get him back to the States. I felt that he needed someone to travel with him. And I just felt that I should complete that. Have everything in order so I couldn't say to myself that I had just quit when he needed me like that in a foreign country. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't speak against him or anything. I performed my duties, but in my attitude, I let him know I was really getting kind of distant the last few days. I didn't bow down to him. I wouldn't come in. I would come in, but I would just bow down to him. He entered Prabhupada's room. He didn't bow down. He stood. He was too uncomfortable to sit because of the gravity of what he would say. Prabhupada looked up from his desk. Yes, Purushottam, Purushottam. I went in to see him. I knew I was going to leave, and it kind of made me sick to do it. Anyway, I told him I have a lot of questions about the movement, the moon, and everything. I just don't believe all of this. He was very congenial about the whole thing. He took it nicely. He said to me, if you have questions, why don't you ask me? And I said, you yourself have said that we should only ask questions to somebody we feel we can believe or trust. He looked very hurt. He knew what I was saying. I felt like I really heard him. I didn't mean it to be so defiant, but there I was. He said, I have noticed that you haven't been well lately. You have had some problems. I said, well, I haven't been trying to hide it. I guess I was trying to prepare him for what was coming. I wanted to leave that night. So I said, I want to leave. But he said to me, you've been with me so long and now you're so anxious to go. You can't even stay a night. He said, why don't you stay at least till my plane leaves? That was 2 days later. I said, okay, I'll do that. I was going to go back to New York. Actually, I didn't have the money for the ticket, and he gave me the money. He gave me the bus fare. I really appreciated that. I could have borrowed some money from someone else, but he said, well, you take it and you can pay me back later. And I did. I gave it back the next week. He was very gracious about the whole thing. Actually, I could see that he had a very special, loving way of looking at the world. I felt that sometimes I could see things in a loving way, like he did. And I realized that I got that viewpoint from him, you know, that little loving spirit. He had that, and I kind of caught some of them from him. And that's one of the things I always remember about him. And I know that through his movement, I came to believe in God. Before I met him, I didn't believe in God. After Purushottam left, Prabhupada spoke with Bhavananda about Purushottam's doubt concerning the moon landing and his consequent doubts of Krishna consciousness. I can understand that he might not accept it because I said it, but how could he disbelieve the Vedic Shastras? So it's not like everybody who came in touch with Prabhupada will stick around and made progress. But for sure, whoever served him, that those spiritual credits would always remain with them. Prabhupada's mercy would remain with them. And if not in later part of this life, some other life, they would come back. That's for sure. Boston's weather was miserable. When the rain stopped, the snow fell, and when the snow stopped, the rain came again. Prabhupada tried taking a walk in the front yard, Bhavanand beside him with the umbrella, watching cautiously to guard him from falling on the ice. But after a week of Boston's nasty December weather, Prabhupada's cold was getting worse. He would go to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, February 25th, 1970. On the auspicious occasion of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's appearance day anniversary, the Los Angeles devotees received permission to enter their new temple on Watsika Avenue. The rooms had not even been cleaned and the large hall was bare, but the devotees brought in Prabhupada's Vyasasan from the old temple on La Cienega, and Prabhupada had them place on it a large picture of his spiritual master. Standing before his spiritual master, Prabhupada offered arati while some 50 disciples gathered around him, chanting Hare Krishna and dancing in the otherwise empty hall. After the arati, Prabhupada directed his disciples in offering flowers to the picture of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Then, still standing before the Vyasasana, he said he had nothing to offer his spiritual master on this day except his own disciples. He then read aloud the names of all his disciples. So that's a wonderful offering. Taking his seat on a low Vyasasana beside the large Vyasasana of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada gave a short history of his Guru Maharaj, son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and powerful Acharya of the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As Prabhupada recalled his first meeting with his spiritual master, he told how Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had told him to teach Krishna consciousness to the English-speaking world. This large new temple, Prabhupada said, had been provided by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as a gift for the devotees to use in Krishna's service. They should not become attached to the opulence, Prabhupada said, but they should use this wonderful place for preaching. As he spoke, he wept. Now bring them prasadam, Prabhupada called, and the feast began. While devotees sat on the floor in rows, Prabhupada from his vyasasana directed the servers, having them bring another samosa to one devotee, more chutney to another, and so on. He watched over all of them, encouraging them to take Krishna's prasadam. That afternoon, Prabhupada toured the buildings. In addition to the main hall, which he would have the devotees convert into a temple, he saw the equally large lecture hall. These rooms, plus a three-room apartment, ample separate quarters for male and female devotees, a parking lot, and a front lawn, made this the finest physical facility in all of ISKCON. We don't require such a nice place for ourselves, Prabhupada told the temple president Garg Muni. We are prepared to live anywhere, but such a nice place will give us opportunity to invite gentlemen to come and learn about this Krishna consciousness. The cost of the building had been $225,000. That's plenty in 1970. With a $50,000 payment, Prabhupada had it more than $10,000 in his book fund, but that was exclusively for printing books. So although he usually didn't like to deal personally in such negotiations, he had made an exception in this case and had asked the other temples to donate to the new world headquarters in Los Angeles. So ISKCON World Headquarters was, in the beginning, it was in Los Angeles. He had even mailed snapshots of the buildings to various temple presidents around the world. Thus, he had collected the down payment, and on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's appearance day, ISKCON became the legal owner. This was the only temple ISKCON actually owned. All the other buildings were leased or rented, and Prabhupada wanted to design everything himself. Hiring professionals would be too expensive, but Prabhupada had plenty of disciples eager to do the renovation. Karandhar knew a little carpentry, plumbing, and general construction, and he could learn more by experience. Bhavanand had been a professional designer, and he was filled with Prabhupada's enthusiasm to transform the plain church into a dazzling palace for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. First, you make my apartment, Prabhupada told Bhavanand. Let me move in, and then we will work on the temple room. Bhavanand. We picked out a part of the Los Angeles temple for Prabhupada's quarters, and Karandhar built a bathroom. When Prabhupada came up to the rooms, he said, this will be my sitting room, this will be my bedroom. And when he came to a third room with a skylight, he said, this will be my library. Prabhupada had told me once in Boston that as a child he had lived in a palace with blue walls, red marble floors, and orange and gold trim, the Malik's house in Calcutta. So we painted the walls of a sitting room blue, and I put in a white tile floor. The drapes were burnt orange satin with gold cords and gold fringe. Prabhupada liked this color scheme very much. In the bedroom, I asked Prabhupada where he wanted his bed, and he said, put the bed in the middle of the room. We had put down a rug, and Prabhupada said, now you should get sheets and cover the rug with them. In India, they have rugs like this, nice rugs, and they cover them with sheets, and on special days, they take the sheets off. Otherwise, they would become ruined. So I went out and bought sheets. Prabhupada was in the sitting room, and when I came in and started putting the sheet over the rug in the bedroom, Prabhupada came in and said, yes, this is very nice. Again, I have introduced something new. This is something new for all of you, sheets on rugs. Then he told me, now make sure there are no wrinkles in the sheet. I was on my hands and knees on the rug, and Prabhupada also got down on his hands and knees right next to me. We were both pressing out the wrinkles from the sheets, and when we got to the end, Prabhupada folded the sheet under the rug. He was very happy there because it was our own place. We had never had our own place before. In the temple room, Prabhupada showed Karandhar where to build the 3 altars. He indicated the measurements and instructed that before each altar should be a pair of doors, and over them the symbols of Vishnu, a conch shell over the altar of our Guru and Gauranga, wheel and club over Radha and Krishna's altar in the center, and a lotus over Lord Jagannath. The spiritual master's Vyasasana was to go to the opposite end of the temple, facing in Radha and Krishna. The walls should be yellow, which Prabhupada said was in the mode of goodness. The ceiling should be covered with a canopy, and there should be chandeliers. Once the altars were completed, Prabhupada wanted to bring the deities, even though much of the renovation was yet unfinished. After constructing an umbrella-covered cart and decorating it with flowers, the devotees brought the deities in procession from the old temple on La Cienega Boulevard to their new home, Bhavanand. First time he came into the temple room after his morning walk, he went to the Guru Gauranga altar and paid his obeisances. We all paid our obeisances. Then he stood up and he went to Radha and Krishna and then paid obeisances. Then to Jagannath, and we all followed. Then we walked back and he sat on his Vyasasana and he told us, now you line up facing each other. From the Vyasasana to Radha and Krishna, face each other. This way, that way. One way you look is Guru and the other way, God. And then back and forth that way. Always leave this aisle. And he said, so I can see. The deity was a king, Prabhupada said, and all the temple residents were his personal servants. The temple therefore should be like a palace. An elaborate temple was important for preaching, Prabhupada explained, because most people, especially Westerners, were not inclined to undergo any austerities for obtaining spiritual life. There was an Indian saying, no one listens to a poor man. That is for sure. Were the devotees to advertise classes on Bhakti Yoga in such and such empty field under a certain tree, Prabhupada said, no one would come. But a clean, beautiful building with chandeliers and comfortable rooms would attract many people to visit and become purified. So that is one of the reasons to build temples, opulent temples. Actually, the same thing happened in Mayapur. Prabhupada and all devotees were working hard to build the temple, a huge building, a huge land they had. And some journalists asked Prabhupada, why are you building such a huge temple? Even that time it was big, now it is even bigger. So Prabhupada said, I can sit in the field and chant, but who would come and listen to me in this field, on the ground, if I sit on the ground? So that's why we need the temples. But after all, yes, it is devotional service to the Lord. When we struggle, we work hard to build the temple, to maintain the temples. But as Prabhupada mentioned, we should not think we are the enjoyers. Temple is Krishna's property, Prabhupada's property. We are here to serve, that's all. And when we lose that mood, that's when the problems start. The temple was also for those who wanted to live there as Krishna conscious devotees. Devotees, Prabhupada said, we should be willing to live and sleep anywhere. But as a loving, protecting father of his disciples, Prabhupada took great care to establish a large temple and an adequate dormitory facility. He was making a home for his family. To see that his spiritual children had a place to live and practice their devotional service was just another aspect of his mission. A special feature of the new temple was Srila Prabhupada's garden. The devotees had excavated a large patch of concrete behind the temple, filled it with earth, surrounded it with cinder block wall, and planted a lawn with flower gardens all around. Karandar. I had dug some beds along the inside perimeter and planted a plant here and a plant there. But Prabhupada said, no, plant something everywhere. No, plant something everywhere. Everywhere there should be something growing. Everywhere there is a place, you plant something. Let there be growing everywhere. He wanted it overgrown like a jungle, a tropical area where plants just grow luxuriantly everywhere. Srila Prabhupada always enjoyed sitting in the garden in the evening with the fresh, cool evening air and the fragrance of the flowers. Topics of conversation in the garden were as varied as Srimad Bhagavatam, all different subjects. Sometimes there would be lively conversations with guests or devotees, and sometimes Prabhupada would spend the entire time just chanting with very little conversation. Sometimes Prabhupada would just have somebody read from the Krishna book. Prabhupada said that his mother maintained a garden on the roof of their house when he was young, that he would go up there in the evenings and play. He remembered that. He always remembered what he liked to do as child. You would hear him reminisce with pleasure about it. Many times he would comment, "My mother maintained a garden on the roof of our residence, and as a child I would go there in the evening and play. Now I also have such a nice place to come." Under Prabhupada's personal direction, the Los Angeles Center became a model for the rest of his ISKCON. At the morning Bhagavatam class, for example, he had the devotees responsibly chant the Sanskrit mantras after him. And he has asked that this become the standard program in all his temples. In May 1970, he wrote to each of his 26 temple presidents throughout North America and Europe, inviting them to visit him at Los Angeles. Now, at the present moment, I am concentrating my energy in this Los Angeles center as ideal for all other centers in respect of deity worship, arati, kirtan, and other necessary paraphernalia. As I have curtailed my moving program, I wish that you may come here at your convenience and stay here for a few days and see personally how things are going on. And by meeting with me personally for necessary instruction, I hope simultaneously in all centers the activities will be of the same standard. The temple presidents who visited Prabhupada, most of them young men in their 20s, came with practical as well as philosophical questions. They came with their notebooks, writing down everything from the temple schedule to color schemes, noting the tunes used in the kirtans, learning how to manage a Sankirtan party, and perhaps most important of all, they would note the things Prabhupada did and the words he spoke personally to them. Temple presidents would then return to their own centers in Berkeley or Hamburg or Toronto or Sydney, glowing with ecstasy and ready to implement dozens of new standards they had imbibed from Prabhupada at the Los Angeles World Headquarters. Although Prabhupada still spoke of expanding his movement more and more, he seemed content to stay in Los Angeles, reaching the rest of the world through his temple presidents, his Sankirtan parties, and his books. New plans were unfolding, however, and Prabhupada again spoke of a governing body, 12 hand-picked disciples to manage all of ISKCON's affairs. He also spoke of initiating more sannyasis and taking them with him to India to train as itinerant preachers. And to ensure that his books were regularly and properly printed, he wanted to form a special committee in charge of book publication. Sometimes managing his worldwide religious movement, sometimes leading the growing group of devotees in chanting Sanskrit mantras in the Los Angeles temple, and sometimes sitting alone and translating in the pre-dawn hours. Prabhupada lived happily in Los Angeles. Obviously, better thing was the weather was good. Los Angeles, it's hot. It doesn't get cold. One day a record arrived from London. The London devotees, who with George Harrison's help had already produced an album, had now also released a new single, Govinda. The song consisted of verses Prabhupada had taught them from Brahma Samhita, each verse ending with the refrain, Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Prabhupada asked that the record be played during the morning program in the temple. The next morning, after he had entered the temple room, bowed down before the deity and taken his seat on the Vyasasana to begin the class, the record began. Actually, that is a recording sung by Yamuna Mataji. Main singer was Yamuna Mataji, and then the chorus is there. But this is what we hear at the time of deity darshan in the morning at 7:15 a.m. Suddenly, Prabhupada became stunned with ecstasy. His body shivered and tears streamed from his eyes. The devotees, feeling a glimmer of their spiritual master's emotion, began to chant Hare Krishna as if chanting japa. The moment seemed to pass slowly. Finally, Prabhupada spoke, Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. He was again silent. Then he asked, is everyone on fine? The response was a huge roar, Jai Prabhupada. And he began the Srimad Bhagavatam class. Vaishnavira Kriya Mudra Vigya Nabuja. No one can understand the mind of a Vaishnava. Only pure devotee can understand another pure devotee perfectly. But by observing the main activities of Prabhupada's life, we can see that whatever he did was pure service to Lord Krishna and was a perfect example of how to surrender to Krishna. He taught by percept and by example. Often encouraging, even praising his disciples, he always pushed them to more and more participation in the blissful Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya. But he also exposed the faults of his disciples. And these faults were sometimes great and painful to see, both for him and for his disciples. One day, as Prabhupada came into his quarters at the Los Angeles temple, he saw that one of the devotees cleaning his room had placed his picture upside down. A simple mistake, but it indicated something wrong in the disciples' mentality. Every morning, the devotees sing prayers to the spiritual master, honoring him as a direct representative of God. How could any sincere disciple not notice that he is standing God's representative upside down? That's an offense. Then a more serious discrepancy. Prabhupada went to the temple, greeted the deities, and went to take Charnamrit, the scented water from the bathing of the deities. It was part of his daily schedule. After his morning walk, he would return to the temple and offer obeisances to the deities while the Govinda record was being played. A devotee would then offer him a few drops of Charnamrit in his right palm, and he would sip it. He had mentioned this item of devotion service in the Nectar of Devotion. Scented with perfumes and flowers, the water comes gliding down through his lotus feet and is collected and mixed with yogurt. In this way, the Charnamrit not only becomes very tastefully flavored, but also has tremendous spiritual value. The devotees who come to visit and offer respects to the deity take 3 drops of Charnamrit very submissively and feel themselves happy in transcendental bliss. On this particular morning, however, as Srila Prabhupada took Charnamrit, he frowned. Someone had put salt in it. He walked the length of the temple room, took his seat on the Vyasasana, and before a room full of 100 devotees asked, who has put salt in the Charnamrit? A young girl in a sari stood and with a nervous smile said she had done it. Why have you done it? Prabhupada asked gravely. I don't know, she giggled. Prabhupada turned to Gargmuni, get someone responsible. Everyone present felt Prabhupada's anger. The unpleasant moment marred the pure temple atmosphere. A disciple worships Krishna by pleasing Krishna's representative, the spiritual master. Therefore, to displease the spiritual master was a spiritual disqualification. The spiritual master was not merely a principle, he was a person, Srila Prabhupada. When ISKCON Press in Boston misprinted Prabhupada's name on a new book, he became deeply disturbed. The small paperback chapter from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam bore his name on the cover as simply A.C. Bhaktivedanta. Omitted was the customary His Divine Grace as well as Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada's name stood almost divested of spiritual significance. Another ISKCON Press publication described Prabhupada as Acharya of ISKCON, although Prabhupada had repeatedly emphasized that he was the founder Acharya. There had been many Acharyas or spiritual masters, and there would be many more, but His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, was the sole founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So, we got to make sure that Prabhupada is addressed properly in the books, whenever it is written down. To make matters worse, when Prabhupada first opened the new Bhagavatam chapter, the binding cracked and the pages fell out. Prabhupada glowered. The devotees in Boston, hearing of Prabhupada's anger, knew at once that the mistake in misprinting Prabhupada's name was serious oversight. Minimizing the spiritual master's position was a grave offense, and they had even published the offense. The serious implications were difficult for the devotees to face, and they knew they would have to rectify the mentality before they could make spiritual progress. Prabhupada criticized the mentality behind these mistakes, and his criticisms were instructive to his disciples. Unless he instructed them about the absolute position of the spiritual master, how would they learn? At the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam class one morning, Prabhupada called on one of the women devotees, Nandarani. She stood respectfully. Do you chant 16 rounds every day? Well, I try to, Prabhupada. This is the problem, Prabhupada said, turning to the temple president. If Nandarani, one of the senior responsible women, wasn't chanting regularly, then certainly the new women under her weren't either. This was the manager's fault. Prabhupada had praised and encouraged his disciples for laboring hard to renovate the temple and for going out daily into the streets to chant and distribute magazines. But for a devotee to not chant the prescribed rounds was to neglect the most important instruction. Again, very, very important instruction for us, all of us. Do not neglect 16 rounds, minimum, whatever we do. What Nandarani hadn't said was that the temple authorities had told her that chanting all her 16 rounds wasn't necessary as long as she worked. They had told her this, even though Prabhupada clearly instructed his disciples at initiation to always chant at least 16 rounds daily. Wow. So, well, there are more instructions coming, so I guess we can stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisance. Prabhuji, what is the difference between Ritwiks and ISKCON? Actually, one of the Mataji said that in the picture where Srila Prabhupada was given Vishwa Guru, there was